Alright, look, getting 5 supers in the space of a minute honestly makes most content in the game trivial. Pair that with artifact mods like Limit Break or Thunderous Retort, which can increase your super damage, and that's it. Game over, GG's, I'll see you next season. Well, never mind. And obviously everyone is going to look at the new Iron Banner armor set and immediately think, Super Refund armor is insane, let's just run this over literally everything else. And I get it, I've seen the clips. I've seen people throwing out Nova Bombs back to back like Bungie accidentally gave Warlocks a kill streak system. And on paper, refunding super energy sounds perfect. But for Chaos Reach specifically, I think that armor set is actually a bait. Because with Chaos Reach, I don't want to just get a bit of super back after it ends. I want my super faster, I want it more often, and I want every single enemy in the room to help me get it. So for this build, we're not using the Iron Banner armor set. We're using Luminopotent, because this armor set is actually disgustingly good. It's also easier to get. And even if you are not building into the super regeneration, it's just a fantastic armor set hands down. See, the 4-piece set bonus allows you to create Ionic Traces when defeating jolted targets, or when defeating targets with Jolt. But the insane part is that it has no cooldown. And I mean, this is insane. Because as far as I'm aware, every possible source of Ionic Traces in this game has some sort of cooldown. So when you pair this armor set with a build that specializes in jolting enemies and generating Ionic Traces at the same time, it turns into one of the dumbest pure Arc Warlock loops I have used in a long time. Because when you pair this concept with an exotic like Geomags, which gives super energy every time you collect an Ionic Trace, we start generating a ton of super energy. And I know 4% doesn't sound insane when you say it once, but when the entire room is creating Ionic Traces every few seconds, 4% turns into 40%, then suddenly you're looking at your super bar wondering how the hell did Chaos Reach come back again already? Pure Arc Warlock, no Prismatic, no technically this is an Arc build, but it's really just Getaway Artist. This is Chaos Reach at its finest. And the loop is extremely simple, just create Ionic Traces. The Ionic Traces come to us after being created, so we could literally just stand still and the build will still work. And I mean, sure, actually playing the game is more fun, but it's the thought that counts. Ionic Traces at base provide a decent chunk of ability energy across the board to all of our neutral game abilities. I'm talking 15% to grenade, melee, and class. These will scale with your stats, but at base, that's the number. And then with Geomags, we're also getting super energy too. And with this setup, collecting an Ionic Trace is also going to overcharge Delicate Tomb, which is essentially our primary weapon for the build. For anyone not familiar with this fusion rifle, Delicate Tomb deals 100% more damage when overcharged after collecting an Ionic Trace, and it also jolts anything it damages, which synergizes perfectly with this build, because killing any jolted target generates an Ionic Trace. And with this cycle of generating Ionic Traces and becoming overcharged, before you know it, you've got another super, and then another one, and another one, and eventually, the game stops looking like Destiny 2 and more like a workplace safety violation. So let's build it properly. We are on an Arc Warlock with Chaos Reach, obviously, since that's the whole point of this setup, but for abilities, Rift, Melee, and Grenade aren't the most important part of this build. I do have recommendations though. Healing Rift just gives you more survivability in harder content, since we don't have Devour or Restoration on Arc. Arc actually doesn't have any natural base healing, so that will be an issue if you play hard content. As for your melee, I like Chain Lightning, because it jolts targets, which can be super handy for getting the Ionic Traces started. And for your grenade, Blinding Grenade just works really well with some artifact mods that I'll go over later. As for the aspects, the first one is Electrostatic Mind. It's historically been the centerpiece for any Ionic Trace build, and this one is no exception, because it still works to create Ionic Traces at the same time as the armor set, effectively allowing you to generate 2 Ionic Traces at once pretty much all the time. And this is honestly one of the main reasons I think this build does so well. Defeating targets with arc abilities or defeating jolted or blinded targets creates Ionic Traces. And when you collect an Ionic Trace, you become amplified. That is basically the entire build in one sentence. So Electrostatic Mind is just the perfect option here. Now the second aspect that I'm going to recommend is actually Ionic Sentry, and this is where the build becomes even more stupid, because the Ionic Sentry gives us another source of constant arc damage without even needing to think about it. We just throw it out and forget about it, which is especially powerful when we pair it with the fragment Spark of Shock, because an Ionic Sentry is considered a grenade and Spark of Shock makes all grenades apply Jolt. Ionic Sentry will apply Jolt and Blind to random enemies all around and cause even more Ionic Traces to be generated. I don't think I need to say more. I'll leave a dim link in the description along with a Mobalytics link, so I'll rapid fire the remaining fragments. Spark of Discharge, collecting an Ionic Trace gives you Bolt Charge. Spark of Frequency, while amplified you gain more Bolt Charge. And lastly, Spark of Beacons. While amplified, final blows with Arc Special and Arc Heavy weapons cause a blinding explosion. This will give Delicate Tomb the ability to crowd control on top of the already insane ad clear that it has. This is going to massively help in harder content, especially when you have enemies that don't die in one shot. So that's the subclass handled. With everything put together, it's just one big disgusting cycle of Ionic Traces all over the place, buffing us insanely well. Now I touched on it already, that our exotic weapon of choice is Delicate Tomb, and this is for a couple of reasons. But I do have an alternative option for you if you want to run this build in, say, Ultimate Seraph Shield Conquest, but I will cover that towards the end. Delicate Tomb is the best option for most content, because it synergizes with Ionic Traces really well. When you pick up an Ionic Trace, you'll trigger Tempest Cascade. This is the exotic perk on Delicate Tomb, and it overcharges one shot from Delicate Tomb to give it 100% increased damage, so you can just absolutely annihilate most targets in every piece of content. The only things that will survive are things like champions and bosses and vehicles, but even then, most champions might get one-tapped depending on the difficulty. The second part of Delicate Tomb is that it also applies Jolt when it's overcharged, which is why the 4-piece Luminopotent set is so important, and I think it's better for this build than the Iron Banner armor set. The Iron Banner set refunds super after final blows with your super, which is cool, but it's only up to roughly a third. So if you blast your entire Chaos Reach so that you've got 0% after it ends, you'll need to gain the remaining 60% of your super back using the other available Ionic Trace generation options, which all have cooldowns. Now stat-wise, I strongly recommend focusing your armor pieces for Powerhouse, making the primary stat weapons and the secondary stat super. We want a high weapon stat because it will help the ammo economy of Delicate Tomb. Not that ammo will be much of a problem, but it's nice not to have to worry about making special ammo. And this is massive, because this whole build is actually really ammo efficient. So much that double specials is extremely viable here. Because with the right armor mods or artifact mods, Ionic Traces can give you armor charges which can be used for special finishes or font mods. But honestly, the mods in this build are just dealer's choice. There's nothing that you have to run versus that you shouldn't run. Just pick what works best for you. Now let's talk artifacts, because there are two versions of this build. One is safer and one is greedier. And I genuinely think both are worth using. It'll just depend on how good you are and the content that you're playing. The safer version uses Slayer Baron Satchel. This is the version I would recommend for harder content, mainly because of curative orbs. Picking up Ionic Traces gives a small amount of health, and since we are generating so many, it's going to keep our health topped up from playing exactly as intended. My other recommendations on this artifact are Trace Evidence, because it's just another way to generate Ionic Traces when we rapidly defeat jolted targets, and as an added bonus, picking up Ionic Traces gives us Armor Charge, which just feeds our special finisher and font mods. There's also Weakened Clear for an added weakened debuff for you and your whole team, and if you're able to get your hands on a grenade launcher with Chill Clip, that's going to be even better, because we have Conductive Cosmic Crystal on this artifact. This buffs Arc and Void ability damage on stasis debuffed targets, so you can pair this with Weakened Clear for just a little bit of extra damage. Now that artifact is the safer version. If you want to be greedy, and you want to drop the healing for better super generation, then Tablet of Ruin is going to be the pick. The main reason is Elemental Siphon. Rapid final blows with a weapon matching your super create an elemental pickup, so that's just another way to generate Ionic Traces, and collecting these Ionic Traces gives super energy, and I believe it's roughly 5%. And this overlaps with the regen from Geomags, giving us massive super energy from the Ionic Traces. So every Ionic Trace can give us basically 10% of our super. Tablet of Ruin also gives us Dielectric, which gives us Bolt Charge when we defeat Arc debuff targets, and that fits, because we are constantly jolting and blinding when the build is rolling. Limit Break is another great option here, as it increases super damage by 15% when you have a matching subclass buff. So in this case, that would be Amplified, Bolt Charge, or Speed Booster. Although it has been nerfed, it is still a great option because we're going to be amplified almost all the time when the build is rolling. And we've got Particle Reconstruction, which is a massive damage boost for fusion rifles. But again, the trade-off here is that you lose the easy healing from Slayer Baron. So pick the artifact that works best for the content that you're running because both options are good. I just want to bring it back to the armor mods for a second and just say keep it simple. You don't need a Cypher mod on your helmet because Ionic Traces are going to give us plenty of super energy and armor charges. So ideally, run super fonts or ammo finders. On the arms, you don't need to run reloaders because Ionic Traces auto-reload Delicate Tomb for you, so run grenade font mods or firepower to buff your Ionic Century. On the chest piece, it's all about resists, and on your boots, Elemental Charge is really important if you aren't running Trace Evidence, but combining the two allows for even more armor charge uptime. Not that you're going to need it. And then run Arc Scavenger, so that special ammo pickups give as much ammo as possible. And finally on your class item, just run Special Finisher and Proximity Ward. It's always a great combo, but if you want to run Utility Kickstart for the extra Rift energy, that's going to be a solid option, especially if you're on Tablet of Ruin. And alright, that's the whole build, and all of the options you have in a nutshell. But I did mention at the start that I have an alternative for extremely underleveled content, like Ultimate Conquest for Seraph Shield. And that's Lodestar. This isn't as strong as Delicate Tomb, but because it runs on primary ammo, we won't have any issues at the start of the activity getting things rolling. It also has a little bit more range compared to Delicate Tomb, meaning if you prefer to stay further back to take on enemies, then this is a strong option for you while still getting benefits out of the build. So give all of this a try for yourself, and if you've got your own tweaks, let me know in the comments. Hopefully this gives you something fun to mess around with the next time you're on with your mates, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.